Ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome you to the 4th Annual Research Showcase. This is a program put on by the Homeland Security Program here at Eastern Kentucky University. As the title implies, this is our 4th year of doing this. Let me go over a few objectives for you. So let me put some context behind what we're trying to do here and what you've seen so far and what you're getting ready to see. I think that's an important part of this, about who you're really talking to when you see these students that are coming up here on the stage today. So when we started this 4 years ago, we went through a pretty detailed planning process, and we talked about, well, why do we want to do this? Why is it important? Because it is quite a bit of work. Now, it gets easier, I'll tell you. It gets easier your 4th year versus your 1st year or your 2nd year, but it brings on a little bit of work. So why do we do this, and why do we feel so passionate about bringing a group of outstanding external judges, about bringing an outstanding keynote speaker, and about bringing out our students on a night right before final exams? So the first thing we want to do is we wanted to show the public and our university community as well what Homeland Security really is. You know, a lot of times what we'll get with Homeland Security is, well, you're those people who screen passengers at the airport, right? That is a thing. That's what Homeland Security is. Well, that is a very, very small part. Yes, I will agree with that. And we do have several students who work for the Transportation Security Administration. But the reality of it is Homeland Security is this large umbrella program that touches a lot of different disciplines. So we wanted to showcase some of the work that our students do in the class through those diverse topics inside of our presentation, our showcase. So tonight you saw something different in the posters if you've been here in years past. Before, we kind of just lumped them all together and we said, here are the 4D posters, and good luck, judges, and we'll come out with somebody at the end. Tonight we pulled those apart a little bit, and we had 3 different categories. We did our disaster management category, an intelligence studies category, and then we did a general Homeland Security category. So when we get to the awards a little bit later in the evening, you're going to see a few different types of winners with that, and then we will name an overall poster winner for that. We wanted the student to communicate, and you're like, really? That's an objective. Well, it is objective. When we're dealing with the digital age nowadays, we're dealing with the texting generation, we're dealing with the Instagram and the social media generation. The ability to communicate face-to-face to someone literally scares a lot of our students, and it'll scare any university student, because they're so used to they'll be in class or in the hallways and they'll communicate with each other. They'll be sitting right next to each other and they'll communicate through text instead of talking face-to-face. So we wanted a reason to get them talking about their discipline, about the subject matter, without using electronic mechanisms, all right? And that's becoming more and more of a challenge. So we have to continue to go back to that type of communication, because like it or not, that's what we're doing in this day and age with most types of occupations. We wanted a greater appreciation for research, right? And I know that from a external perspective, most people think that that's all we do at a university, sit back and pontificate and scratch our chins and think about the worldly problems. Well, a lot of times we leave undergraduate students out of that equation, unfortunately. And what you're dealing with when you talk to our students out there were undergrads. There were no graduate students within that population, which made it even more impressive when you think about the work that they were doing. Most all of them that were presenting out there were doing it for a specific class. So that's showcasing what they've done throughout this we're in week 15 right now. It's a big deal when you're in a semester when you get to week 15, because 16's it. So next week is finals week. So you're going to see that this is the closure for them of that piece. And then we just want other folks from other programs, other community members to understand what we're doing in this program. That was from our selfish reasons. We want other people to see what's going on. And I want the freshmen and sophomore, and those a lot of you sitting in this audience, to see what you will be doing in a few years, because most of the students you talk to were juniors and seniors. The freshmen and sophomores will be taking that coming forward. So those were our objectives for the showcase. I always want to put some things in context with a few quotes, and this is one of my favorite ones. Zora Hurston is an anthropologist, right? So her quote was, "Research is formalized curiosity. It's poking and prying with a purpose." We have several courses where we put some parameters around the research, but basically students can choose their own topics. And it's great to see the diversity of topics and the level of sophistication that some of these projects have brought on. One of the things I want to mention before I forget, this was the first year where you saw, we had 44 posters is what we ended up with. All of them were professionally printed this year, which is a big deal. We want to thank Dr. John Gordon, undergraduate research here at EKU. He printed, through his program, printed some of the posters for our students. The other group of students were able to print it through the Bluegrass Intelligence Grant. So no student this year paid to have their poster printed. Those printed posters are between $30 and $40. So that's a big deal for our students. So we're very appreciative of both of those programs for printing those posters. Neil Armstrong said, "Research means to investigate something that you don't know or that you don't understand." That curiosity and that research approach is something we feel very strongly about. And what we have to remind our faculty of from time to time, because you'll see some topics out there, you'll say, "Oh, that's a little bit far-fetched for me." Well, it reminded me of a story that I'd heard that I want to share with you. Go back 1960s, Yale University, okay? And there was a project, a concept paper written by an undergraduate student. And the professor wrote the student on his paper and said this: "The concept is interesting, should be interesting and well-formed, but in order to earn better than a C on this project, it has to be feasible." That's what the Yale University professor responds to Fred Smith's paper proposing reliable overnight delivery service. That was his quote. Well, that's what happened with Fred Smith's idea. Fred Smith formed FedEx a few years later, and I guess the rest is history. We have to continue to foster these ideas, whether we believe that they're quote-unquote feasible or not. We have to continue to push our students to think outside the box. You know, coming from a Homeland Security world, when you read the congressional reports after 9/11, it said, on the top of it from the Senate, it said, 9/11, a lack of imagination. And that's what the number one reason they said is the reason we did not apply effectively the defensive purposes from that experience. We couldn't imagine that that would happen to us. So outlandish and creative thinking is something that we need to push a little bit more, okay? I want to make mention of one of our retired faculty members. The picture up in front of you is Dr. Norm Spain. Dr. Norm Spain was here for over 20 years, this university. Actually was one of the forefathers of the Assets Protection Program, is what Homeland Security actually transformed into. When Dr. Spain retired, his wife established a scholarship in his name. And because of that scholarship here tonight, the winner of the oral presentation will receive a $600 EKU academic scholarship, and the winner of the poster presentation will receive a $400 EKU academic scholarship. Now, I hear a lot outside the hallways and outside my office, and I can tell you this is a competitive group. There's been a little bit of banter back and forth for this money. And I don't know if it's even the money or the plaque so much, but we've got a competitive crew, so I look forward to seeing how this turns out here today. But I told them just, especially with these oral presentations, we got a few nerves backstage. I'm going to tell you that too. So I told them just to breathe and to have fun, and everything else is going to fall into place. The showcase agenda, I'm going to introduce the keynote speaker here in just a moment. Very impressive keynote speaker this year, and I think that you'll enjoy her remarks. After that, I'm going to bring forth the MC of the evening, and he'll introduce each of the 5 presentations from our students. The student presentations will last each about 15 minutes, is what we've told them to keep their remarks to, is 15 minutes. That's very difficult at times, and some of them, that's the greatest point of consternation that they're having right now, is they've taken an hour-long presentation and they've tried to push it down into 15 minutes. So I've told them not to try to compensate by talking even faster about their topic for tonight. After that, the judges will deliberate. They're going to go back and deliberate on the oral presentation, and they'll deliberate once again on the posters. And then during that deliberation, stay put, because we're going to do the Order of the Sword and Shield. That's our National Honor Society. We have 16 inductees tonight. That's double of any other class that we've ever had. And I'm pretty excited about that. Tonight we're going to do something a little bit different than during that period as well. We're going to introduce to you our honor graduates for December. December graduates get a little bit of an unfair shake because there's not a lot of awards in December. It seems like they all come in the May graduates. So we're going to bring up those honor graduates, and then we've got another special award to present to one of those individuals as well. So before I get any further into this presentation, I'd like you to help me thank our judges that are seated in the front row. These folks are volunteers. They come because they are deeply rooted into these professions, whether they be research, Homeland Security, disaster management, intelligence studies, whatever those may be. These judges take their time. Many of them are return judges. Our students enjoy that interaction with them. We judge them every day, whether formally or informally. So we wanted to get external judges, and they do a great job. So please help me give them a hand and thank them for coming tonight. It's now my pleasure to introduce to you our keynote speaker for the evening, Ms. Tawanda Owsley. She was selected as Executive Director of the Bluegrass Chapter of the American Red Cross in August of 2017. In her role, she is charged with the mission of the American Red Cross, which is to prevent and alleviate human suffering in the face of emergencies by mobilizing the power of volunteers and the generosity of donors. She has over 15 years of experience in philanthropy. Prior to joining the American Red Cross, she was the Market Director of Philanthropy for Kentucky One Health, leading the fundraising and philanthropy efforts for St. Joseph Hospitals in Lexington, Mount Sterling, Berea, and London. During her career, she has provided leadership and strategic fundraising oversight at prominent institutions such as the Cincinnati Children's Medical Center, University of Kentucky College of Pharmacy, Norton Healthcare, and Metro United Way. She is currently on the board of directors of the Lexington Children's Theater and is part of the 2017 Leadership Lexington class. She is a graduate of the University of Louisville, where she received her bachelor's in business marketing and management. She received her master's in business communication from Spalding University. She's a Lexington, Kentucky native and currently resides in Georgetown, Kentucky with her husband, 2 children, and 2 stepchildren. Ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome to the stage Ms. Tawanda Owsley.
Good evening. Thanks for having me. And I think I arrived and got the best compliment I've got all week, which was the confusion of whether or not I was a student. So I was happy to hear, are you a student? It's been a long time since someone asked me if I was a student. I want to thank Ryan, or Dr. Baggett, as well as Dr. Foster and the Dean of the college for inviting me to speak today. Ryan actually serves on our board of directors for the American Red Cross, so it's a privilege to have him serve. In the audience today, I really feel like I'm among some peers and some students for sure, but definitely want to recognize our emergency management folks that do the hard work, particularly Tim that leads the Lexington office for emergency management, and he's a phenomenal leader, and we're just lucky to have him in Central and Eastern Kentucky. And I want to applaud the students. I walked around for a bit just to look at some of the presentations, and overwhelmingly, I'm just impressed by the level of attention to detail and energy that you all put in your project. So if we could just give a round of applause for the students and their hard work. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about being ready. The American Red Cross, we have responded to just an astronomical amount of disasters here lately, but I want to talk about a little bit about being ready and tell a little bit about who we are as the American Red Cross. I'm going to share some statistical information, so I will look at my notes a little more than I usually prefer to do, but some interesting facts out there about the response efforts that we had recently with the amount of disasters that we had to respond to. And then I'm going to talk about some tools and resources that we have at the Red Cross to help you all be ready. So Dr. Baggett shared what our mission was, so I won't go into that any further. But But something that I think a lot of people don't know about the American Red Cross is that we're a very trusted brand. Our brand is really recognizable. We're right behind Coke, so I'm kind of proud of that. We're the second most recognizable brand, the American Red Cross. Been around for over 100 years, founded by Claire Barton to help our military families during the World War I and the First World War. So we've been around for a while, and 99% of Americans feel like we are one of the most trusted brands. To kind of speak to who we are in Kentucky and some of the response efforts that we do and the disasters that we respond to in this area. Disaster services within the state of Kentucky, we responded to over 2,000 disasters last year. So a lot of that is fires that we respond to most often. We raised about $1.3 million to support those disaster relief efforts. Blood services, how many of you all give blood? Thank you. EKU is really a strong blood supporter. I think you just had a drive last month, and we're going to come back and ask you for some more blood next month, so thank you, please give. Blood is what we're most known for. 40% of the blood that goes out to the hospitals in the country come from the American Red Cross. Really proud of the blood services arm of the Red Cross. About 38,000 people help receive that blood here in our area. 96,000 blood products were collected in our state. So thank you, EKU, for giving us your blood. Thank you, students, for giving so generously. We prepare. Preparedness is another piece of the American Red Cross. Preparedness, health and safety and services. How many of you have gotten CPR trained? Lifeguard trained? Hopefully you did that through the Red Cross. That's a big arm of the work that we do. If you have not got CPR trained or certified, please visit our website at redcross.org and get trained as soon as possible. 9,000 children were reached last year around our pillowcase project. That's another preparedness program that we have. And lastly, the last arm of the American Red Cross is our service to the armed forces. Again, we were founded to help the military families. We help provide direct support to military families every year. Last year, we provided about 3,700 direct service requests to about 3,700 service members. Really proud of that work. When I talk about preparedness, one of the things that happens in Kentucky, we have a lot of floods, of course, but we have fires almost daily. We have installed about 1 million smoke alarms from the American Red Cross across the country. In our area, we installed 10,000 alarms last year, 40,000 households we were in, and we did that with 35,000 volunteers. So that's a huge, huge portion of the work that we do. We actually have an event on April 28th where we're going to be installing smoke alarms in this area, so if you want to volunteer to help us with that effort, Dr. Batt, can share a little bit more information with you about helping with that effort. So now let's talk about the disasters. Starting in late August, the American Red Cross responded and launched just wide-ranging relief efforts that helped devastating communities with 3 historically devastating back-to-back hurricanes, and that was Hurricane Harvey, Hurricane Irma, and Hurricane Maria. And then right after those hurricanes came the California wildfires. None of that was what we expected. The interesting thing about the hurricanes and the way that they came, we had always used our benchmark of measurement was Hurricane Sandy, was our frame of reference. That's what we always referenced to, which was a really devastating hurricane as well, and really impacted a large portion of the country. Never ever were we expecting to have 3 back-to-back hurricanes. Through those hurricanes, first I'll start with the wildfires. We had about 2,700 people that stayed in our emergency shelters. Tim, imagine that with those California wildfires. And I want to, because Tim helps us so much with our emergency management, so 2,700 people stayed in our shelters, our emergency shelters. We served about 200,000 meals, and this was with the California wildfires. We distributed about 145,000 emergency relief items like masks and gloves, because the thing that's so interesting about the fires, the response to fires is really different. So when we come in and we respond to floods, and I'll talk about this, we come in with buckets, with mops and brooms and cleaning materials. When we come in and we respond to wildfires, we come in with sifters, like sand sifters, because folks are trying to find their most valuable things. And it's really kind of heartwarming because you'll see folks pulling all this gravel and they're putting it in a sifter and they're shaking because they want to find a wedding band, or they want to find a piece of jewelry that their mom left them, or an earring or some necklaces or whatever. So we're coming out and we're bringing sifters and we're bringing up cleanup materials, and that's what we're doing when those things happen. And then we're providing comfort kits because you've lost everything. So when these fires happen, you completely have lost everything. So more than 2,900 people relied on us to come in and help them find things. We provide financial assistance immediately when those things happen, and we immediately help provide shelter, whether that's a shelter in our shelters or we also provide financial assistance to help you get on your feet. Since last August, in response to Hurricane Harvey, Irma, and Maria, we provided 1.3 million overnight stays in our emergency shelters. So I shared the 27,000 number for California first so that you could kind of see what the difference is in the hurricane responses. California wildfires was 27,000. The hurricane responses was 1.3 million. See the difference in the magnitude of the number of people that stayed in overnight shelters. We were in 8 states, including Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. For Harvey, more than 414,000 people were in overnight shelters in Texas and Florida. For Irma, more than 556,000 shelters were across 6 states in the U.S. Virgin Islands. For Maria, more than 357,000 overnight stays occurred. With all of these relief efforts, we raised $800 million to help support that. In Kentucky, we raised $6 million, so thank you, Kentucky. I'm so proud of the work that we did during that time. With help from many partners, we served about 12.9 million meals. The Red Cross distributed about 6.6 million emergency relief items. We had about 215 mental health professionals, because this is another element, and I didn't see this in any other presentations, and maybe I overlooked it in the emergency management side that I was on. It's the mental health piece of it. When you're faced with a devastating disaster, whatever that is, whether that's a fire or a flood, when you lose everything, there's a lot of trauma that takes place during that, and I want you all to remember the trauma that happens there and the amount of mental health professionals that we had to provide. And I will say, from Kentucky, we sent about 20 volunteers that were mental health professionals to Texas. And then the one thing I didn't mention through all this hurricane relief efforts was the Las Vegas shooting. The American Red Cross was there, and we sent mental health professionals to Las Vegas in the middle of all the hurricane relief and California wildfires. So something I want to speak of, on October 31st, the Red Cross had an authorized program to provide financial support to families, where we were giving $400 to every family that was affected by Hurricane Harvey relief efforts. Who knew that when you said you were going to give $400 of free money, what would happen? People came from everywhere. I mean, there were all kinds of people trying to get $400. Our system shut down. You know, you talk about things that work and things that don't work. Our system shut down. We were not prepared. RedCross.org was not prepared to get a lot of people responding to get $400. So it kind of slowed down, and we weren't prepared for the number of people that wanted that money, and we weren't prepared for over 500,000 people that were severely affected by Hurricane Harvey, that $400 mattered to them. So we kind of had to regroup and get everybody together. So it took us a day or so, and we kind of got hit by the media. So what happens in disasters that no one tells you about, and I'm saying this in my 4 months at the Red Cross, that I learned really quickly, that at first everybody's your friend, then everybody turns on you. So at first they want to help, and then quickly they turn on you, and we saw some of that, and we definitely saw it in the financial assistance piece of it, and we learned a lot. And I was really proud of our organization, because we learned quickly, we fixed things, and we responded quickly. So because our system shut down, we got criticized for not giving people their money quick enough, even though it was a 48-hour turnaround from the time our system shut down and the time that we fixed their problem. So I thought that was pretty impressive. I don't know how many people could fix things in 2 days, but needless to say, we've provided over $229 million to financial assistance to those folks affected by Hurricane Harvey. So today, we've had so many partners that have helped us throughout all these different relief efforts, and it's because of the generosity of communities that we've been able to kind of do the work that we do, this most important and critical work that we do with the Red Cross. I think for anyone thinking about disaster response and definitely thinking about being a part of emergency management, or even looking at an organization to be affiliated with, the preparedness piece is something that I don't think we spend enough time on. And I'm really not going to still chase his thunder, because he follows me and he's got a great presentation about resiliency, so I'm going to kind of stop so that he can have a little time to talk about that. But I do want you all to know that there are plenty of tools and resources out there to help you be prepared when things do happen. And particularly if you visit our redcross.org site, there's information out there. Please download our app. so that you can be prepared. Like I said, the number one disaster that we face all the time is our fires that hit us 1 to 3 a week that we're responding to in this area. So make sure you're ready for that. A home fire campaign is a huge initiative that we do. I'm praying that we don't have an ice storm. It's been 9 years since we've had an ice storm, so I know I'm probably not alone with my emergency management folks that are in the audience that we hope we don't have a bad ice storm this year, but it's been a long time coming, and the way it feels today, it feels like that winter could come sooner. But we will be there to respond to that if something like that happens. Download our apps and make sure that you're prepared if anything happens. If no one has any questions or anything like that, and I don't know if we're taking questions from the podium, but I'm happy to answer any questions. But I want to thank you all for your time today, and I want to thank the students for putting in the in-depth research. We are looking for interns, so any of you emergency management folks that want to come and intern with the Red Cross, I'd be happy to have you and your level of expertise. And so thank you all so much for having me.
Thank you, Tawanda. Well, now here we go. Here we go to the main event, right? Yeah, that's Bailey Cox. You'll meet him in a minute, and you understand why that picture is so appropriate for this young man. Bailey won. I made the deal in previous years that if you win the competition and you're still a student, I'll let you come back and be the MC. I had to think very carefully about this and threaten this young man several times about that we're very serious here tonight and to make sure that we continue that tradition going forward. So he's promised me that we will do that. We will see. The winner of last year's poster presentation and this year's Research Showcase MC is Mr. Bailey Cox. Bailey's from Minneapolis, Minnesota. He's going to graduate in a couple of weeks. I almost said years, Bailey. In a couple of weeks and plans to join the United States Navy. Bailey is a Homeland Security major with certificates in Spanish and Social Intelligence and Leadership, and is a BGS IC CAE scholar. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Bailey Cox.
I'd like to thank Dr. Baggett for those very kind and very accurate words. I would also like to thank everyone here for being afforded this opportunity to come and be the Master of Ceremonies for this evening's showcase. This showcase is an excellent opportunity for students like myself to come and demonstrate the research that they've conducted throughout their semester. With that being said, we have 5 outstanding oral presentations that you guys are all about to be privileged to see. For our first presentation, we have Mr. Kenneth Chase Worthington. Okay, there we go. His presentation is entitled Pathways to a Resilient Kentucky, and this presentation was developed through his HLS 461 Disaster Resilience course taught by Dr. Chad Foster. Chase is a senior from Georgetown, Kentucky, majoring in Homeland Security with minors in disaster management, security operations, and criminal justice. He is graduating in a couple of weeks and plans to start a career in federal law enforcement. Ladies and gentlemen, Chase Worthington.
Thank you for that introduction, Bailey. I guess they saved the best for last. All right, so like you said, this is for HLS 461 for Dr. Chad Foster's class, Disaster Resilience, and we're gonna take a look at a short video over disaster resilient communities from the Salvation Army. Okay, so there's this idea of building disaster resilient communities, but what does this mean? What is resilience and how do we get there? And what does this look like for Kentucky? So we're going to take a look at a practical definition of resilience. The National Academy of Sciences defines resilience as the ability to prepare for and plan for, absorb, recover from, and more successfully adapt to adverse events. Resilience has evolved along two pathways, one focused on specialized applications such as engineering, ecology, and psychology, and the other is more inclusive framing. This inclusive framing term of community resilience encompasses broad-based risk reduction efforts, perspectives at various scales, and multiple disciplines, including social sciences, systems thinking, and the entire hazard cycle of mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. The resiliency of a community depends on the capacity of that community to act at each disaster phase: mitigation, anticipation, protection, response, deflection, and recovery. This disaster impacts model helps us picture and understand how community characteristics set the stage for how disaster will affect the community and what actions will be taken at different stages of disaster to minimize impact and recover quicker. It shows us the importance of considering planning policies and actions associated with mitigation, preparation, response, and recovery for addressing the physical and social impacts of hazards and recovery outcomes. The physical impacts are those that are highly visible and that we see in the news and the media, such as casualties, injuries, property and infrastructure damages or losses, and damage to the environment. Social impacts are less obvious but can be just as damaging. They include temporary displacement or long-term dislocation, psychological impacts such as PTSD, anxiety, and depression, political impacts such as change in leadership or instability in the government, and economic impacts like losses or changes in businesses or interruptions of goods and services. The hazard exposure refers to the likelihood of experiencing a certain hazard, and physical vulnerability is the extent of development of infrastructure in terms of location, strength, and quality, and social vulnerability is a variation of population to anticipate, prepare for, and recover from a disaster. Social vulnerabilities consider factors such as age, race, income, education, and family composition, among others. These community characteristics are the basis for community resilience, and plans must be based on understanding and the assessment of these characteristics. These characteristics affect each other and have potential to increase or decrease damage and loss during a disaster. The goal of planning for disasters is to reduce the physical and social impacts, and resilient communities will have fewer of these impacts after disaster. So what are the hazards that we need to prepare for in Kentucky? As a class in 461, we decided to look at flooding, tornadoes, and earthquakes. These three were chosen because according to the Kentucky State Hazard Mitigation Plan, flooding is the most costly hazard to Kentucky with an average annual loss of $43 million, and tornadoes were second with $19 million. There have been 12 disaster declarations in Kentucky since 2005, and 10 of those have included flooding, and 7 included tornadoes. As you can see, the reported loss map shows what areas of Kentucky have been impacted on more than one occasion by floods and are vulnerable to be flooded again. The tornado vulnerability map shows that across Kentucky is vulnerable to tornadoes. Although earthquakes have a low probability, there is a potential for high magnitude of losses. There are fault lines that run through much of Kentucky. There are 3 seismic zones in Kentucky, and they are the Eastern Tennessee Seismic Zone, the New Madrid Seismic Zone, and the Wabash Seismic Zone. Scientists believe that these are overdue in a surge in activity because they have been inactive for a significant amount of time. 3 of the largest earthquakes in the contiguous United States have occurred along the New Madrid Seismic Zone in western Kentucky. Looking forward 50 years, these are the hazards that happen the most frequent or have the potential for the greatest impacts. So what are the pathways to resilience for Kentucky related to these hazards? There are physical capital. The pathways for resilient Kentucky are the physical, social, and economic capital. The physical capital refers to the built environment and infrastructure systems capacity to withstand the effects of disasters and to function. This includes housing and commercial and industrial facilities, public buildings, lifelines such as electricity, water, sewer, and transportation, and communication and critical facilities like hospitals, schools, fire, and police stations. Kentucky's critical infrastructure is an essential element for a properly functioning community. Critical facilities ensure people have the resources and support during disaster response and recovery. The social vulnerabilities are the characteristics of a person or group in their situation that influence their capacity to anticipate, cope with, resist, or recover from the impact of a hazard. These disadvantaged populations have many unique needs and are a unique concern to local authorities and volunteer efforts. The economic capital are the financial resources that a community uses to support their livelihoods, as well as the economic conditions of the entire community and the ability to recover quickly following disasters. This includes savings, income, investments or businesses, and credit. Economic capital is important because resources increase the ability and capacity of individuals, groups, or communities to absorb disaster impacts and speed up the recovery process. A more stable and growing economy will generally increase the resiliency of the community, whereas a declining or unhealthy economy is an indication of vulnerability. So what do these pathways look like for Kentucky? The physical capital. Flooding has the second highest property loss in Kentucky according to the Department of Energy in 2016, with $30.4 million, and is worse off than most states when it comes to inland flooding, with 160,000 residents, or 4% of its population, at elevated flood risk, and over 8% of bridges in Kentucky have been deemed structurally deficient, leading to less resilient critical infrastructure. Kentucky has not seen a significant damages due to earthquakes in the last 50 years. This is believed because the inactivity of the New Madrid Fault is overdue and is likely to cause an earthquake in the future. Tornadoes are also another leading cause of property damage in Kentucky. And to increase the resiliency of Kentucky's physical capital, there needs to be an increased number of communities taking part in the National Flood Insurance Program, local government involvement in the community rating system, and updating building codes to include structural movement by floodwaters, tornadoes, and earthquakes. Social vulnerabilities. Recognizing social vulnerabilities is essential to resilience. Kentucky has a much higher population of citizens living in poverty than the national average, as you can see by the chart on the left. And these disadvantaged populations could increase the impacts of the disaster if not planned for accordingly. Other issues that face Kentucky are education levels, lack of healthcare coverage, and housing policies. As you can see, a large portion of eastern Kentucky is already deemed to have low resilience due to some of these issues and a large population of disadvantaged persons. The economic capital. Kentucky is leading the nation in manufacturing, agriculture, and mining. Manufacturing in Kentucky includes automotive vehicles and parts, as well as boats and airplane parts. While Kentucky leads the nation in manufacturing, 66% of the economy actually comes from agricultural beef, through beef cattle and thoroughbreds. Climate change has also begun to play a role in Kentucky's economic capital as well. There's been a switch to find alternative power sources to coal, and there are shorter growing seasons for farmers, both impacting the economy negatively, which could lead to a less resilient Kentucky. So what? Why does any of this matter? Just this past year, we have seen examples of resilient communities and not so resilient communities. For example, Hurricane Irma made landfall in the Florida Keys as a Category 4 in September of this year. And in one day, half of the power outages were restored, and nearly all residents of Florida had power within the week. But on the other hand, Puerto Rico was hit by Hurricane Maria 10 days later, also a hurricane, Category 4 hurricane, and only 20% of the power was restored after 1 month. These natural disasters are not entirely natural events, but they're the outcome of the interaction of systems like the built-in social environment and physical environment. Also, urbanization has led to an increasing number and severity of disasters, which is likely to continue with climate change. Resilience takes place before, during, and after a disaster. And to circle back around to the intro video, Kentucky must be a safe community with a strong physical infrastructure, prepared and aware of the hazards that exist and the vulnerable areas, have the resources to recover quickly, and have a sustainable and stable economy, and be unified, connected, and inclusive with disadvantaged populations. It is important to understand that these pathways play a large part in absorbing and deflecting impact, rapidly recovering, adapting, learning, and enhancing conditions. Each of these pathways contribute to the overall resilience of Kentucky and operate within the context of a system. If Kentucky wants to be as resilient as possible to a disaster, the inclusive framing of resilience should follow the pathways of physical, social, and economic capital. And before I wrap up, first off, I just want to thank the Lord for everything, and Dr. Baggett and Dr. Foster, Dr. McGlown, Dr. Sullivan too, and Dr. Simpkins. He did my interview yesterday, so we'll put him. But the Homeland Security program is awesome. I got to do an internship in New Zealand with Charlie Dobb. He did a poster downstairs, and they really want to see everyone succeed, and it's been awesome. Like Dr. McGlown and Dr. Foster were literally sending me resources across the world to help me over the summer with my internship. So I just want to say that I was thankful for that and the program in general, and thanks to you all.
All right, thank you, Chase, for that. Next up, we have Kevin Hagerman, whose presentation is Enhanced Dynamic Geosocial Environment, formerly known as EDGE. And this presentation was developed through HLS 441, Homeland Security Technology, taught by the phenomenal Dr. Ryan Baggett, of course. Thank you. Kevin Hagerman is a senior Homeland Security major with a minor in security operations. Kevin will be a first-generation college graduate this coming May of 2018. Then he plans to pursue a career within the private sector as a private security executive for high-value people and/or organizations. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Kevin Hagerman.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you are all enjoying tonight's research showcase as much as I am. All right, I've seen a lot of impressive research posters out there. You should all give yourself a pat on the back for doing such a great job. As Bailey mentioned, my research will be for Dr. Baggett's HLS 441 class, which tasks students with identifying and assessing current and potential trends of technology within the Homeland Security enterprise. Tonight, I will be presenting my original research on the Enhanced Dynamic Geosocial Environment, or better known as EDGE. So, what is EDGE? Well, EDGE is essentially an integrated virtual reality tool that first responders are able to utilize and work together with in order to respond successfully for high-impact emergency situations. EDGE is a computer-based virtual reality simulation program that can be downloaded and used on laptops throughout emergency agencies across jurisdictions throughout the entire United States. As I said, EDGE allows multiple disciplines, that is law enforcement, emergency medical services, and fire service personnel to utilize this technology in order to train effectively. EDGE ultimately improves decision-making among first responders, which breeds success for an appropriate response in the real world. The EDGE platform allows first responders to train for however many times they would like. Through repetitive training, that is, first responders can start to build upon their decision-making skills and ultimately improve them. By utilizing this training platform and training to make quick and effective decisions throughout your training, first responders are able to apply this skill set in real-world emergency situations. Also, EDGE coordinates appropriate response strategies. As I said, repetitive training comes with the EDGE technology, and through repetitive training, first responders are able to develop and implement response strategies throughout their training. A unique capability through this benefit is that every simulation, or every strategy, ends with a different result. That is, the strategies that are implemented end in a effect by the threat itself. When using EDGE, first responders are encouraged to apply various response strategies in order to accomplish their objectives. That is, the appropriate response strategies are coordinated through this training through a hierarchical structure of command. Also, EDGE ultimately increases a first responder's situational awareness. With first responders having the capability to repeatedly train with the EDGE program and obtain and build upon this skill set of making appropriate decisions, as well as coordinating their various response strategies, they're also increasing their ability to assess and be aware of a situation. Being aware of your surroundings and what circumstances a first responder may encounter when responding to a real-world emergency will benefit them and their first responder personnel for a successful response operations. All right. The developing partners responsible for the EDGE technology are the Department of Homeland Security Science and Technology Directorate's first responder group, who teamed up with the United States Research, Development, and Engineering Command's Simulation Training Technology Center, or STTC. By the joining forces of these two departments, first responders are able to train for high-impact emergency situations like never before. A fun fact about the developing partners is that the United States Army had already had an existing virtual reality simulation program in which soldiers could train for coordinated responses overseas for combat. The Department of Homeland Security identified the need for a tool in which first responders could adopt and utilize in order to effectively approach for emergencies. And by identifying this need, they joined forces with the United States Army and began developing what essentially is EDGE off of the pre-existing virtual reality simulation program that the United States Army had already developed and implemented. EDGE was piloted in Sacramento, California in 2013, and during this pilot evaluation, personnel from jurisdictions all around the Sacramento area were encouraged to attend and participate in the initial version of EDGE. The pilot encompassed a 2 to 3 day training seminar for first responders from various jurisdictions. As you can see, the first responders assumed the roles of various avatars, which I will touch on here in a second. And as you can see to the chart, you have the ability to assume the role of suspects, dispatch, officer group, firefighters, deputy chief, fire dispatch, medic strike teams, civilian victims, and even a unified command. The participants for the initial EDGE pilot arrived on scene where they would eventually use the training program. After assuming these roles through a high-definition avatar system, they began the initial version of EDGE. The initial scenario that EDGE encompasses was an active shooter scenario emergency in an upscale hotel in downtown Sacramento. A group of hostile terrorists invade this hotel and begin taking hostages as well as killing innocent people. This scenario is loosely based on the Mumbai terrorist attack in 2008, which resulted in 160 casualties. This scenario encompasses the ability for first responders to receive the initial 911 call and arrive on scene within minutes. After participants are able to arrive on scene, that is when they can assume the roles of avatars. And through this, begin making appropriate decisions, implementing response strategies, as well as coordinating those response strategies. The first responders are able to role play using high-definition avatars that represent various disciplines during a response operation. That is, participants can assume and begin training as law enforcement, fire personnel, and emergency medical services, and begin utilizing the capabilities of this virtual reality simulation in order to respond to such an emergency. For example, emergency medical service personnel can arrive and begin setting up a triage for the injured and severely wounded avatars. A unique capability that comes with the Edge pilot was that if a first responder did not assume the role of an avatar, or the victims in this pilot, artificial intelligence algorithms controlled these avatars, which means these avatars had the capability of responding to gunfire, responding to the fire that would eventually be set off in the hotel, and present kind of mass chaos as you would expect in an actual emergency. This capability really allows first responders to get a sense of the mass panic they would have to deal with when responding to such an emergency. The purpose of this pilot was for first responders to really get a feel for the Edge technology. After responders trained over the 2 to 3 day seminar, they were encouraged to provide feedback and suggestions for further improvements of the Edge technology. However, these suggestions and feedback were biased in some way. For example, fire personnel from the jurisdictions surrounding Sacramento provided feedback on the fire response personnel avatars, as well as emergency medical service personnel provided feedback dealing with their profession. Decision makers ultimately took these suggestions and feedback and began improving on the Edge technology as a whole. And in the next year or so, we will see these improvements come out as agencies are able to start implementing this training technology as a whole. So that was the pilot evaluation. That was the purpose of it. It was really to give first responders a feel for exactly what this training technology encompassed. Okay, so with any technology, there are going to be advantages as well as disadvantages. Some of the advantages that come with the Edge technology are that it encourages a more integrated training purpose among first responders. That is, law enforcement personnel, fire service personnel, and emergency medical service personnel, as well as dispatch and just regular civilians, are encouraged to train together on the same platform for a more complex emergency in order to really develop and implement strategies that are needed in order to successfully respond to these emergencies. This is the first time this is the first time first responders were really able to work together and collaborate with one another underneath the same roof, essentially. Also, the sandbox capability of the Edge environment really allows jurisdictions to begin to modify and adjust the environment in which first responders assume the roles of avatars and train for. To elaborate a little bit more on that, law enforcement and first responders in Lexington, Kentucky can take this initial environment and modify it to where it represents downtown Lexington. You have Rupp Arena and all the infrastructure that they are familiar with, in which they can begin developing and implementing response strategies. So jurisdictions all across the United States can take the initial Edge environment and just modify it to better represent the area and geography in which they will operate in real world scenarios. The personal customization of avatars is a very unique capability. As I've said, first responders can assume the roles of high-definition avatars when they are training for high-impact situations. First responders are capable of personalizing these avatars to reflect their facial features, their race, their gender, their hair color, their eye color, to the best of their ability, which ultimately creates a greater immersion for responders during their training, which will ultimately increase the internalization of what skills they are working on and what skills they are developing. The universal utilization of EDGE is very simple. Not only can first responders use this technology, schools, businesses, any companies can adopt this technology and begin training their workers, their faculty, for high-impact emergencies. For example, schools can adopt the EDGE platform and utilize its capabilities to train faculty for a school shooter, which is more common on the rise. And by the universal utilization of this technology, more and more companies are able to train on the same level as first responders, which ultimately creates a more resilient community all around. And one of the biggest advantages is that it is very cost effective. When an emergency response agency wants to adopt the EDGE program, all they have to do is simply download it to their computers. Once they download it, it is there. Personnel can begin to train immediately and repeatedly. The only thing that would cost an emergency response agency with this program would be to acquire the equipment, so headphones and a laptop. So it's very cost effective. With technology, there are also disadvantages. One of the primary disadvantages is that virtual reality does not replace hands-on training. Hands-on training is very beneficial for first responders, and they rely on that every day when they go out into the field. Another prominent disadvantage would be the lack of familiarity among superior roles in emergency response agencies. To elaborate on this disadvantage in particular, I'm going to tell a story that Dr. Baggett mentions to his classes several times, and it really illustrates just how big of a disadvantage this is. A few years ago, Dr. Baggett went to a rural community with a sheriff department to analyze and assess how they were utilizing mobile data computers at the time. Now, this was at the time when law enforcement personnel were able to have the data computers in their cars that allowed them to place data in and find their way to an emergency. So while Dr. Baggett was assessing this, he continues to talk about how he rode along with an older gentleman who never once opened the laptop. Dr. Baggett eventually asked him, why hasn't he used the mobile data computer? That is what Dr. Baggett's job was there for. He then continues to tell how the older gentleman had just a couple of years of retirement until retirement. So why would he bother with training and learning how to use this technology when he would never have to use it once he retires? And this unfamiliarity with modern day technology creates a barrier in which response agencies may not acquire the technology as a whole, ultimately preventing them from using this training platform. Also, some first response agencies may hold certain uncertainties as to if virtual reality simulation technologies hold any credible benefit to training. Ultimately, this will create another barrier in which prevents first responding agencies to adopt and begin to utilize the technology as a whole. These are just a couple of the disadvantages that I found that were more prominent than others, as well as the advantages. This slide is essentially the so what of the technology. So why is this technology relevant? Why should first responders adopt and utilize this technology? Well, I like to refer to these as the 3 C's. And these 3 C's are the terms I associate with the EDGE, and they are communication, collaboration, and coordination. They're all very important and very critical for a successful response for high-impact emergencies. Communication should be simple. Plain language is utilized for the appropriate flow of information throughout this training while using EDGE, which encourages first responders to maintain plain language while they are in the real world responding to an emergency. Collaboration is encouraged. As I said, EDGE encourages an integrated training among first responders in which will breed success while integrating with one another for a real world emergency. Also, coordination is increased. Strategies, operations, information, and roles assumed are all coordinated appropriately for an effective response when using the EDGE platform. So, ladies and gentlemen, that is essentially the EDGE platform. It is new, it is innovative, and it is effective. Thank you all for coming tonight and allowing me to present my research for you.
Thank you, Kevin, for that very informative presentation about EDGE. Next up, we have a presentation by Ms. Kimberly Matola, who developed this presentation entitled Industrial Control Systems, Threats and Vulnerabilities from one of the favorite classes out of the Homeland Security curriculum, which is HLS 321W, Critical Problem Analysis. And this particular class was taught by Ms. Amy Hughes. Kim Matola is from Hebron, Kentucky, and is pursuing a bachelor's degree in Homeland Security with minors in psychology, informatics, and cybersecurity and intelligence, in addition to her certificates in intelligence and security management. Ms. Matola is expected to graduate in spring 2019, and she hopes to acquire a cybersecurity analyst position within the U.S. Department of Energy's Office of Intelligence and Counterintelligence. Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Kim Matola.
Thank you, Bailey, and thank you all for coming tonight. I'm very excited to talk to you about industrial control system threats and vulnerabilities. First of all, what are industrial control systems? At a base level, industrial control systems are used in critical infrastructure to acquire data and control the actual components on the systems. Some of the critical infrastructure sectors that ICS are used in are things like the energy sector, the water wastewater sector, financial sector, and the manufacturing sector. The main components in industrial control systems are the engineering workstations, which are the physical computers and laptops and tablets that the engineers work on, while the human-machine interface systems are the software on those systems. In the field, there are field controllers, field devices, and safety systems. The field controllers are the switches and components that do the controlling of the systems, whereas the field devices assess the data and acquire that to put it in a format that the engineers can review. Safety systems, on the other hand, are an automatic process where the systems automatically may shut down if the pump overheats or a sprinkler system comes on to protect both human life and the systems. Why is ICS vulnerable? The first reason ICS is so vulnerable is due to the outdated systems on the network. The reason being that they're outdated is because it's too expensive and too time-consuming for most companies to orchestrate and update. The second reason ICS is so vulnerable is due to an issue in cybersecurity culture. There are three subcategories to the cybersecurity culture. The first being inadequate background training and knowledge. There's an issue in the cybersecurity universe where there's, especially in ICS, where there's your engineers and operators, and then there's the IT professionals. The engineers and operators are working to keep the systems running and ensure that downtime is kept to a minimum, whereas the IT professionals are not looking at the uptime, but rather they're looking at the security of systems. Because of this, there's a clash between the two. IT professionals are not concerned with downtime, they're concerned with security, whereas the engineers and operators are solely concerned with the uptime and not necessarily concerned with security. The second and third cybersecurity culture issues are very similar, and this comes from inadequate training as well. There's weak authentication. This is where an employee uses weak passwords or weak usernames to access their systems. These are things like admin for the username and password for password. We've all heard about weak passwords and usernames. The third cybersecurity culture issue is information disclosure. This again comes into play with inadequate training. Oftentimes, the employees at a company do not understand how classified the information they handle on day-to-day basis are. If they are working on something in the workplace and then they go home and they tell their family, some of that information may be classified, and if fallen into the wrong hands, may be a detriment to the company or organization. The third and final reason why ICS is so vulnerable is due to connectivity and network architecture. So as I said before, ICS systems are outdated. When they were first put into place, it was not the intention to work with the internet. ICS was never supposed to connect to the internet. It was like there was the ICS system, there's a brick wall, and then there was the internet. The brick wall was impenetrable to data. However, now there are like tiny little holes in that brick wall that allow data to pass through. That allows for ICS to have more connectivity and be better used in the connected world that we live in today. However, this also allows the reverse to happen, where data comes from the internet, from hackers, to affect ICS systems. In addition to that, to connect to the internet, you also have to have an IP address. It is like the definition of a computer. An IP address is similar to your home address for criminals. For a burglar or a criminal, the first step in breaking into your home is accessing or realizing your home address. The same goes for IP addresses. Hackers first look for your IP address to be able to access your system. The difference is, for a burglar, it takes anywhere from a week to a month to break into your house. Whereas for a hacker, once they find out the IP address, it may take them 15 minutes. There's actually a video on YouTube of two gentlemen hacking the power grid in 15 minutes. Here's a short video of an open source website that you can find industrial control system IP addresses with a few clicks of your mouse. The protocols that you see here are like categories. They define the systems. Once you find a category that you know a system's running on, you can find the IP address, other classified information, and the location. So some common threats to ICS. These are categorized into two different categories. There's the internal cyber threats and external cyber threats. Internal cyber threats are defined as any threat or incident that is directly caused by intent or negligence by an employee or vendor. There are 5 common categories that I've researched. The first is deception, which, as you can see, phishing is the main one, and it makes up for 37% of all of the reported incidents in 2015 in the United States. The second common category is negligence, which again, this makes up for quite a large portion of the incidents. Together, those make up for 9% of the incidents in the United States in 2015. The last 3 are often not found, but they are revenge, financial, and recruitment. Again, referring back to this pie chart, in the blue are the exterior threats, while in the gray are unknown or other. This is also an issue that we do not know the majority or a lot of what is attacking our systems. External threats. External threats are identified as any threat or incident that an outside hacker completes the attack without any assistance from employees. There are 2 common categories. There's malware, which may be in the form of viruses or Trojan or backdoors, which most of these run in conjunction with a program or document. However, there are some that can run as standalone programs. The second category is denial of service. This one is growing in complexity and severity. A denial of service attack is where a hacker is able to gain access to a large number of computers through some type of malware, and then he or she uses those computers to overload a system. For instance, Google, probably the most common server that we all use on a daily basis. If a hacker were able to access 1 billion computers and use those 1 billion computers to send a simple query or question like, what's the weather today? That would overload the system and effectively shut down Google for an extended period of time. Not only does this shutdown affect authentic users that are trying to use the service, but it also affects Google's financial standards. This affects their economic upturn or downturn. They lose money without those searches. This is another point where critical infrastructure is a business. So, what can the U.S. Department of Homeland Security or its partners do to mitigate the threats to ICS? In my research, I analyzed 3 different potential solutions for the Department of Homeland Security and their partners. The first is training. This may be training for employees on what to look out for threats or what not to do, such as taking a USB drive from the parking lot and putting it into their work computer. This type of training will mitigate internal threats. The second potential solution is funding with direction. Funding alone may work to an extent. However, in my research, I covered that funding with direction, funding with set goals and standards is extremely effective. Even with the goals, an annual review is also necessary to ensure that the funding or direction is meeting these goals. Research with dissemination is the third and final potential solution for DHS and partners. Currently, DHS provides annual research on threats and vulnerabilities to ICS. They do release this information. However, there are private organizations that do this research on their specific vulnerabilities and threats, but they do not disseminate this. This is one of the biggest issues, is the lack of information sharing. It's likely that one organization's vulnerabilities or threats are similar to another's in the ICS world. If this information is shared, it will likely create working groups and it will decrease or mitigate the external threats. Why is this important? Why is it necessary to look at the future of this nation's infrastructure? Well, at the end of the day, all of our infrastructure operates as a business. It's all looking to make money, while also protecting and connecting American lives. To maintain critical infrastructure as a business, it is necessary to maintain resiliency and security of ICS. This is to continue allowing operations to work. In order to do that, we have to consider the threats and vulnerabilities to ICS in addition to considering the consequence if the threats and vulnerabilities are overlooked. Critical infrastructure is the backbone of the United States, including the United States economy. If critical infrastructure businesses fail, it does not just affect that business, but it has the potential to destroy the United States economy. In conclusion, industrial control systems are intricate and essential to both critical infrastructure and the American way of life. Due to this criticality, it is necessary that we take precautions and increase security. Everyone sitting in this room has the potential to assist in this effort. I implore you to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Next up, we have Hunter Ratliff doing a presentation entitled Hamas in Gaza. This presentation was developed through his HLS 403 Intelligence Analysis course taught by Professor Marty Broaddus. Hunter Ratliff is from Richmond, Virginia, and is majoring in Homeland Security. He also has a certificate in Intelligence Studies and a minor in Political Science. He is a member of HOLT and is also an ICCAE scholar. After graduation, Hunter plans to enlist in the United States Air Force and hopes to later pursue a career in the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Hunter Ratliff.
Good evening. This evening we're going to talk about Hamas. Hamas is a religious terrorist organization in the Middle East that operates in Gaza. Some of the history behind Hamas, Hassan al-Banna. He created some radical documents, which in return, Hamas was inspired by these radical documents. These documents include things like how he was not happy with how the Egyptian and Islamic government was going. He was not happy how the Egyptian and Islamic governments were going, and he feared that they were being inspired by the Western civilizations. The Hamas meaning is the Islamic resistance movement against Israel. So they really want to see the destruction of Israel. They were established in 1987, and in 1990 they started their suicide bombings in Gaza, which in return caused a retaliation from Israel, and Israel started bombing Gaza. Their leadership, Ismail Haniyeh, he is the supreme leader of Hamas, and his parents were actually a part where Israel is now. He was actually uprooted out of his home and moved into refugee camps in what is now Gaza. He has actually spent time in an Israeli prison. Yahya Sinwar, he is the prime minister. He got this position by actually killing another Hamas commander. And he was sentenced to serve 4 life sentences, but was later released on an exchange between him and another Israeli Defense Force high-ranking official. Their ideology, they're a Sunni militant Islamic movement. They are a democracy for as of now, and they are a Muslim Brotherhood affiliated group. The Muslim Brotherhood deals a lot with the religious terrorism, and they like to fund a lot of the religious terrorist groups. They want to create a police state where people aren't allowed to have freedoms. Most of their freedoms, if you talk about Israel, or you talk bad about Hamas, or you talk about their rival political party, Fatah, it's usually punished by death. After they create a united Palestine, they want a worldwide holy war, or jihad. Their funding. A lot of their funding, just like many terrorist organizations, come from charities and other aid. But unlike other terrorist organizations such as ISIS and Al-Qaeda, Hamas actually operates in their own government. So a lot of their charity money comes from the Holy Land Foundation, which is actually located in Texas. Other countries have given Hamas this money also, but it was given as humanitarian aid. They didn't know what exactly was going to be used for. The UAE gave $87 million to Hamas, but the UAE thought that it was going to be used for infrastructure, such as homes, jobs, businesses, healthcare. Other countries such as Saudi Arabia and Qatar are iffy on whether or not they knew that they were going to use the money for humanitarian aid, but that's how the money came in, was for humanitarian aid. But this money was not used for infrastructure. It was used for bombing raids on Israel. Their operating locations, mainly they're stationed in Gaza, but they're starting to branch out into the West Bank. Palestine is Gaza, consists of Gaza and the West Bank. Fatah, their rival political party, actually controls the West Bank, and Hamas's plans are to overthrow Fatah in the West Bank. They want to control both of these areas so that way they can create a caliphate. much like ISIS or Al-Qaeda. Attacks in Israel and Hamas territory, they're not afraid to risk their own people in order to succeed in their own mission. And they are willing to go into other countries as suicide bombers and then use this to get their mission across. They also operate outside of the Middle East and other areas, but this is more for monetary gain and to get more money in order to aid their mission. Death to Israel. Some of the experts believe that the U.S. may be in their Hamas's crosshairs once they create a united Palestine, if they create a united Palestine, and they have also targeted U.S. citizens in Israel. Their known weapons, like most terrorist organizations, are from the USSR, and a lot of these weapons come from smuggling tunnels. Israel has actually tried to destroy a lot of these tunnels, but has failed to destroy some of them, and Hamas just keeps building new ones. Some of these weapons include short-range missiles, long-range missiles, anti-tank missiles, and anti-aircraft missiles. Some experts believe that the long-range missiles can reach up to the northernmost countries of Israel, which would put their used-to-be capital, now Jerusalem, according to Donald Trump, in the crosshairs of Hamas. They also want anti-aircraft missiles, mainly because Israel is arguably one of the best air forces in the nation. And they use a lot of their drones and airplanes to fly over and gather surveillance on Hamas in order to see if they're doing anything suspicious or planning on another bombing raid. So they don't really have the sophistication to build airplanes or other kind of drones or anything like that, so they have to rely on bought USSR anti-aircraft missiles. But their preferred weapon is a suicide bomber. These people are seen as martyrs for the cause of Hamas, especially if they kill Jews or Christians in their mission. This is asymmetric warfare. Hamas will not fight Israel force on force because their force is lacking. So they revert to standing behind their border and sending missiles across, or sending people in a bus to blow up a city, or children into a hospital with a suicide vest on them. Their propaganda, they have three major sources of propaganda. They use political videos, military videos, and sympathy videos. These political videos are more geared towards other countries in the Middle East. And they use this to get monetary gain and money and support, usually for infrastructure. A lot of these videos will consist of people smiling and saying hashtag thank you Hamas. The military videos consist of, in order for them to get more support from the terrorist funding organizations that are already funding Hamas. A lot of these videos include the metallic fist holding Iran child's dog tags, a high-ranking Israel Defense Force high-ranking official, and this also gains support from these other organizations that are looking to put their money somewhere else. And then they use sympathy videos. A lot of these sympathy videos are more geared towards like the United Nations or other nations that might not be a part of the Middle East. So nations like the United States, Russia, England, France, these nations have a big impact in the United Nations Committee. And Hamas uses these videos that Israel is the bad guy, that we can't defend ourselves, that Israel is attacking us, as sympathy videos, which actually gains them monetary means to bomb Israel. So now we're going to get more into the analysis part of it. Why they became a threat. So they started out as a political movement. They wanted to unite Gaza and the West Bank. They also emerged through infrastructure. So they promised the people of Gaza that they would give them jobs, better health care, better education. And their political figures said that they would fight for the people of Gaza. Hamas is a realist political ideology, and they were looking for a fight with Israel, while the Fatah, the rival party, was a liberalist ideology. So they wanted a peace through policy. And there was a deep-rooted hate for Israel in the Gaza Strip. They felt like that their homes were taken and they were uprooted out of their lands, And after Hamas bombed Israel in 1990 with suicide bombers, Israel retaliated with rockets, and a lot of these people didn't understand why the rockets were raining down upon them. They just saw the Israeli rockets coming down. How they became a threat. So a lot of the people, like I said before, hold grudges because their homeland was taken or their ancestors' homeland was taken. And they feel like that it is their job to get it back. This created a hatred for Israel and allowed radical ideas to form. And without hatred, Hamas would have no power because the rival party, Fatah, would be able to seize power back in order to establish peace between Hamas or Gaza and Israel. Not saying that it would be as peaceful as the United States and England, but it would be more peaceful than Israel and Hamas. And a lot of these people who voted Hamas into power are uneducated. They don't understand why Israel got land after World War II or what the means for the land that they got. And so a lot of these people, due to the uneducation and the not very good education system in Gaza, the only way that they can seize honor from their family is to join the fight against Israel. And the only way that they feel like they're justified is in order to get it back, to honor their family and to honor their ancestors. The future of Hamas. So Hamas will gain in political power. They will gather resources like they always do and maybe establish a united Palestine between them and the West Bank. With the destruction of ISIS right around the corner, it is likely that all the funders who are funding ISIS now will look for another terrorist organization to put money into. And a lot of experts believe that Hamas is the next ones to fall in line. After all, they have established a government. ISIS has failed. After all, they have gained resources and other support from their people. Al-Qaeda has failed at that also. Hamas, it will no longer be a democracy. It will be an autocracy. This is already in the works because of the police state. A lot of the people are oppressed because they can't speak out. And a lot of people, if they support the opposite political party, are publicly executed in order to make a statement. So if they're supporting Fatah publicly, usually an example out of. And if people support Fatah in Gaza, usually they do it behind closed doors or in underground tunnels. So in the future, Fatah will probably be absent from Gaza. And if they can gain control over the West Bank, they might be absent from the West Bank as well. So there are three major nations in order to combat Hamas. First of all is Israel. Israel is prepared for mass war. They have already stated that they are ready to go to war against Hamas and basically wipe them out of the earth. They say in the UN that they are tired of Hamas calling it acts of war when it is actually acts of terrorism. I mean, when someone sends a suicide bomber in a bus down a street, that's no act of war. And Saudi Arabia before has given monetary aid to Hamas, but they recently just elected a new king, Mohammed bin Salman. He has recently just actually arrested 10 plus members of the royal family due to corruption. And a lot of people in Saudi Arabia are calling him the king to end corruption. And he is stating that Hamas is just like ISIS. And he is stating that there is no difference between the two, that they have the same ideology and the same mission. And he is asking for a complete evacuation of Muslims out of Gaza in order to combat Hamas. And lastly, the United States. A lot of people don't like to hear about the United States getting back into another Middle Eastern war. So this is some ideas maybe the United States could take to not put boots on the ground. The United States, they can actually go to the UN and call Hamas a terrorist group. Some of the countries in the world, like Russia, they don't recognize Hamas as a terrorist group. They recognize them as a violent political movement. And also, they could put sanctions on Palestine. And in this, when they put sanctions on Palestine, which would allow them to cut off funding or people giving funding to Gaza, and this would also limit the amount of rockets that would be sent into Israel. And then they could openly support Fatah. If they openly support Fatah, many members of Hamas will see the United States backing the rival political party. And if they're seen backing the rival political party, many of the members are likely to give up and go to the other side because they don't have a hope against the United States, and they don't have a hope against the United Nations. If the policies and procedures go through, there's no way that they can succeed. Thank you.
All right, and for our final presentation this evening, we have Miss Tiffany Peel, who is going to do a presentation entitled Post-Cold War Intelligence Issues in the Middle East. This presentation was developed through HLS 400, taught by Dr. Brian Simpkins, which is the evolution of the U.S. intelligence community. Tiffany is a senior from Wilmore, Kentucky, and is majoring in psychology with a minor in criminal justice and a certificate in intelligence studies. She is a member of the EKU Honors Program and the ICCAE Scholars Program, and she will graduate in a couple of weeks and plans on working as an analyst. Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Tiffany Peel.
Good evening. In this presentation, I will focus on the intelligence issues in Afghanistan and Iraq. This is because the United States went to war with both of these countries following the 9/11 terrorist attacks. Therefore, I found it crucial to examine what intelligence we did collect, what capabilities we had, and how that information was analyzed. My research led me to several conclusions, and my bottom line up front is first, that the Middle East was not viewed as a large threat by the United States. Second is that the threats in the Middle East could have been mitigated with developed technology, increased human intelligence, and increased information sharing between agencies. The relevance of this issue is that the U.S. has still not learned from many of the mistakes. Additionally, the U.S. entered 2 wars that cost billions of dollars. Before I discuss my findings, I want to go into some of the background. When the Cold War ended in 1991, the threat of communist expansion no longer existed. Communism was a threat that was easy to identify with a limited number of solutions. The U.S. could use technology to identify the threat, and they could use covert action to intervene. However, the new asymmetric threats like terrorism, economic espionage, and nuclear weapons could not be solved with these traditional tactics. These new threats changed the entire purpose of the IC. During the Cold War, several agencies existed for the purpose of gathering intelligence on the Soviets. The NRO, the NSA, and the CIA conducted most of their intelligence during this era. However, the new duties of these offices were unclear for dealing with terrorism and nuclear weapons. Without the obvious need for intelligence, the Clinton administration cut the budget in half in 1993, and this cut proved to be detrimental to the intelligence community. Terrorism was one of the biggest threats after the Cold War. Defining who and what the threat is will always be difficult. This is because terrorism is so deeply rooted in ideologies. Therefore, it becomes difficult to fight this issue. Additionally, the development of nuclear weapons has always been an important issue for the intelligence community. But the U.S. is mostly focused on the Soviets' nuclear capabilities. Therefore, Middle Eastern countries were often overlooked as a threat. So when Saddam Hussein stated that Iraq was seeking a weapon of mass destruction, it was not taken seriously. Overall, the IC after the Cold War was very disorganized and unprepared for the threats in Afghanistan. Looking specifically at some of the issues in Afghanistan, we see the rise of Al-Qaeda. This can be traced back to the 1980s when 25,000 Arabs traveled to Afghanistan to fight the Soviet Union and reconstruct the country. By the 1990s, Al-Qaeda rose under the leadership of Osama bin Laden, with the Taliban acting as their allies. By 1998, Al-Qaeda had attacked 2 U.S. embassies in Africa, and in 1999, bin Laden openly threatened the United States. Taking a look at Iraq, we see the threat of nuclear weapons as the biggest concern. Trouble with Iraq started during the first Bush administration. Iraq invaded Kuwait, and despite that the IC had monitored the movement of the Iraqi troops, the United States relied on Egypt's estimates to determine the Iraqi capabilities and did not gather their own intelligence. Saddam Hussein stated that Iraq wanted to develop nuclear weapons in the early 90s, but the US did not seriously investigate this until 2002. After the 9/11 terrorist attacks, rumors began to spread about Iraq having ties to Al-Qaeda. However, the US did not have any agents in Iraq to investigate this until 2001. So let's start looking at my findings. I found that the lack of the development of technology after the Cold War to be a factor in the lack of understanding of the threats in Afghanistan. During the Cold War, there was a rapid expansion of technology from creating the NRO, the U-2 spy plane, the NSA, as well as aggressively gathering signals and imagery intelligence. However, the IC did not continue to expand their technological capabilities, and what is worse is that we did not use the available technology we already had. Some of the issues that could have been mitigated with technology would have been monitoring bin Laden, as well as gathering surveillance on potential terrorist threats that were already in the United States. Let's start with bin Laden. In 1996, bin Laden had permanently moved to Afghanistan. In 1997, he was identified as a terrorist rather than just a financer of terrorism, which is what he was previously labeled as. The United States had the technological capabilities to gather information on bin Laden. The NSA should have utilized signals intelligence to determine who he was associated with and how large the threat of Al-Qaeda was. The NRO was specifically created to monitor weapons of mass destruction, track international terrorism, and develop accurate military targeting data. These duties should have continued after the Cold War, but the NRO suffered the worst budget cut. After 9/11, the NRO was utilized again, and based on their capabilities, the US would have been able to have tracked bin Laden and his followers, provided geolocations of many of the followers, as well as identified what military capabilities they had. Another issue was that the US did not gather intelligence on terrorists who may have already been in the US. Just months before 9/11, a Minnesota flight school reported that an individual was only interested in learning to fly a plane. He did not care about taking off, and he did not care about landing. Later, French intelligence informed the IC that he was an extremist. Yet there was no surveillance gathered on this individual. This is in part due to the laws that the US had in place about gathering information on citizens on US soil. However, these laws were later changed, and they could have been changed earlier. Switching over to Iraq, we see a similar issue. The United States had the technological capabilities, but it was not utilized as often as it should have been. For Iraq, you will see the same issues every time: the potential threat of a weapon of mass destruction and possible ties to Al-Qaeda. The U.S. intelligence community's pre-war assessment goes into detail about the intelligence gathered in Iraq on a weapon of mass destruction. Most of this data is classified, but the conclusions are unclassified, and they state that the United States waited too long to gather signals and imagery intelligence. This delay created a gap in information and a scramble to find data that was not actually there. Based on the capabilities, the United States should have utilized signals earlier. This data could have revealed the capabilities and the allies Iraq had in creating a weapon of mass destruction. Imagery intelligence should have been gathered to see if and where a facility would be for a weapon of mass destruction. Unfortunately, the United States relied on one human source to determine if Iraq had a weapon of mass destruction. Additionally, the US was concerned about Iraqi ties to Al-Qaeda. The pre-war assessment had similar conclusions. The United States waited too long to gather signals and imagery intelligence. While imagery intelligence would not have been beneficial for this, signals could have intercepted communications. The second issue I identified is the lack of human intelligence. The biggest issue that could have been solved with human intelligence is understanding Al-Qaeda. As a whole, agents in the Middle East were scarce. Individuals had focused all of their studies on learning the Soviet Union and understanding their language and their culture. Therefore, many people did not understand the culture in the Middle East, and they did not speak Arabic. This led to a communication gap between agents and the individuals in the Middle East. Reliable human intelligence is something that will always be important. Terrorist organizations understand the dangers of using technology, so sometimes human intelligence is the only way to gather information. The problem with the human intelligence in Afghanistan is that Al-Qaeda existed 10 years before the intelligence community extensively gathered intelligence. Weeks after 9/11, the CIA sent in a jawbreaker team of 7 agents and 2 U.S. Special Forces teams. With just a few people, the U.S. was able to create the Northern Alliance with Afghanistan, and they had pushed the Taliban and Al-Qaeda into the mountains and out of the cities. And after just a few weeks, they had located bin Laden with just human intelligence. Since this was sent in just a few days after the 9/11 attacks, the The U.S. had these resources before the attack, but they were just not utilized. Additionally, from 2007 to 2014, the United States created the Human Terrain System. This system embedded anthropologists into Army units. The anthropologists understood the culture in the Middle East, and they were able to reduce kinetic strikes by 80% in some areas. Several of the anthropologists died, leading to the program ending. While the program was removed, it is important to consider the success. The U.S. could train individuals and anthropologists for deployment. Additionally, anthropologists could go through basic training to prepare them for military actions. This program should have been developed sooner because many individuals in the intelligence community already did not understand the Middle East. Luckily, the IC did have more human agents in Iraq because the 9/11 terrorist attacks created more awareness and more of a need for human intelligence. Again, with Iraq, you will see the same two issues, the potential of a weapon of mass destruction and ties to Al-Qaeda. The U.S. intelligence community's pre-war assessment said that prior to 2002, there was no reliable on-the-ground sources in Iraq to investigate a weapon of mass destruction. This was an issue because Iraq showed in the early 90s their desire to have a weapon of mass destruction. This is in part due to the budget constraints that existed during this time, but Iraq was also just overlooked as a threat. The U.S. mostly relied on foreign sources, essentially hearsay, to understand about the weapon's capabilities. There was one foreign source that stated that Iraq had a weapon of mass destruction, and the credibility of that source is in question. It is important that human intelligence that is collected is reliable and trustworthy. Iraq did have a human source, but there was no prior relationship, meaning that the sources could not be completely trusted. The U.S. also had concerns about Iraqi ties to Al-Qaeda. In 2002, there was still no human intelligence officers in Iraq. The U.S. responded eventually by putting in 4 inexperienced agents to investigate Al-Qaeda. However, the IC should have responded to 9/11 by training many agents to send it to different countries in the Middle East. At this point, Al-Qaeda's capabilities were not understood, so the U.S. needed to be prepared for the worst. But it was over a year before the IC managed to get sources in Iraq. The U.S. did not have a strong grasp on human intelligence after 9/11, and most of the intelligence that was collected was not shared between agencies. Information sharing is the third issue identified in the post-Cold War. The 9/11 Commission report states that 9/11 was shocking, but it was not a surprise. The growth of Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan was proving to be a problem in the early 1990s. In 1993, a car bomb outside the World Trade Center killed 5 people. In September of 1999, the National Intelligence Council reported that Al-Qaeda posed the biggest threat to the United States and warns that they may crash into the Pentagon, the CIA headquarters, or the White House. From January 2001 to the day of the attack, the Federal Aviation Administration reported 15 possible warnings of terrorist hijackings. And the day before the attack, the NSA intercepted communication from Afghanistan that said, "Tomorrow is 0 hour." The most concerning part about this is that these warning signs were coming from different agencies. The information had just not been put together, despite that the warnings were coming from 3 years prior. The FBI, the CIA, the FFA, other agencies and departments did not communicate these concerns, even though these were threats that involved potential terrorist attacks. However, it took the Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act of 2004 to change how intelligence agencies shared information. This act required that information about terrorism is shared immediately. The implementation of this act 10 years after the Cold War illustrates a huge problem because the IC identified terrorism as the next big threat after the Cold War. There were 2 years between 9/11 and the Iraq War, and despite that the IC had realized that information sharing was a major problem, it remained an issue in the intelligence collected on Iraq concerning a weapon of mass destruction. Research suggested that information sharing was an issue for a weapon of mass destruction, but the information about ties to Al-Qaeda is still classified, so I cannot conclude that it was an issue here. However, looking at a weapon of mass destruction, the CIA kept many of their human sources in Iraq a secret. While agencies expressed a need to know for this information, intelligence was still not shared. At this point, the United States did not mandate information about a weapon of mass destruction be shared, but the IC was starting to move towards that environment. 2 of the major reasons the United States went to war with Iraq is the potential involvement with Al-Qaeda and the possibility that Iraq had a weapon of mass destruction. Intelligence gathered between 2001 and 2003 suggested that Iraq had neither. Therefore, there was no reason to go to war with Iraq in 2003. but there was a need to collect more intelligence on the threat and share that information with other agencies. Information sharing would have prevented the United States from entering war through Iraq so early. Agencies should have communicated about what intelligence existed and what intelligence they needed. Additionally, multiple agencies had concluded in 2002 that Saddam Hussein did not have a weapon of mass destruction, and he would not have one for 5 years. Estimates should have been reevaluated before entering the war if they were skeptical on that. This suggests that agencies did not respect the outcomes and estimates of other members in the IC. Iraq and Afghanistan were not the only threats to the United States. Pakistan had developed a nuclear weapon without the IC's knowledge. Even after this was discovered, the US did not utilize the same resources as it did when the Soviets had a nuclear weapon. In addition, Pakistan, Iran, Israel, and Syria were all modernizing their militaries. The US reacted to this threat by proposing to create the anti-ballistic missile system. But the military capabilities in the 1990s were not advanced enough to follow through with this plan. Another threat in the Middle East after the Cold War was Saudi Arabia. As later revealed, most of the hijackers from 9/11 were from Saudi Arabia. However, it was not viewed as a threat because their desire to contain Saddam Hussein made them an ally, leading to the lack of intelligence collection on that country. In response to the Middle East, after 9/11, the United States declared a war on terrorism. Many countries in the Middle East showed a willingness to accept the help of the United States. While Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, and other terrorist organizations are highly present in this area, the individuals throughout the Middle East did not necessarily support terrorism. The split within the country gave the United States an upper hand. The only issue is that these bonds were not created until after 9/11, when they should have been established after the Cold War. Thank you. This concludes my presentation. My email is on the screen, and I'm available afterwards if you have questions.
At this time, I'd like to invite our judges to join Dr. Foster out in the stairwell. You have some important decisions to make based on the 5 excellent presentations that you've just seen. If you could join me again in giving a round of applause for our 5 student presenters here tonight. While the judges are making their way out of the room, I'd like to ask Ms. Catherine Wyant to join me on the stage. Catherine is the president of this year's Order of the Sword and Shield. That is a National Honor Society for Homeland Security and Intelligence Community. This evening we have approximately 16 students who will be inducted into the Order of the Sword and Shield. We started this about 3 years ago as a chapter and had about 4. Last year we had 8. So this year we have 16. So we'll see what the good work these folks do. So Catherine, if you can come onto the stage with me, and we'll let you get started here this evening.
Good evening, everyone. As Dr. Baggett said, my name is Catherine Wyant, and I'm the president of the Order of the Sword and the Shield. The Order of the Sword and the Shield is a national society which honors high academic achievement in Homeland Security, intelligence studies, emergency management, and all protective security disciplines. The purpose of this organization shall be to promote critical thinking, high scholarship, and professional development, to further enhance the ethical standards of the protective security professions, and to cultivate a higher order of personal living. The Society was established in 2010 on the campuses of St. John's University in New York. It soon became a national organization as chapters were established in academic institutions across the country. These candidates here today, who are now presented for induction, have achieved the high academic standard required by the Order of the Sword and the Shield and are worthy of recognition by the university and this organization for their notable achievements and scholarships. I would like to ask Dr. Victor Kapler, the Dean of the College of Justice and Safety, and the chapter advisor, Dr. Ryan Baggett, to please join me in the front of the auditorium. Would the following students please step forward where you will be presented with your certificate of induction and your society pin. After you receive these items, please sign the Honor Society honor roll sheet and then please remain on stage. Alexander Arnold. Ray Block. Jennifer Combs. Charles Dobb. Chelsea Forwood. Kevin Hagerman. Kimberly Matola. Savannah Nelson. Megan Ramirez.
Patrick Riley. Arabella Stamper. Jaron Thomas. Jacqueline Tyler. Sheila Velasco. Eric White. And Catherine Wyatt.
For this academic year, the following individuals were elected for the following positions. Myself as president, Savannah Nelson as vice president, and Kimberly Matola as secretary. Today, we recognize true academic achievement and acceptance of the core values of the society. Would Ms. Vice President Savannah Nelson please step forward as I ask you to light the candles of each of the four core values. The first candle represents ethics, for the ethical standards displayed by each of these candidates today and in the future as they assume professional careers. The second candle signifies excellence, as evidenced through the academic accomplishments achieved by each of these candidates. The third candle embodies knowledge and the commitment to continue the pursuit of personal and professional growth long after these candidates have entered the professional world. The fourth candle stands for peace, as the ultimate goal of all who enter into these disciplines honored by our society. These four candles shall represent ethics, excellence, knowledge, and peace. Will the inductees please repeat after me? I accept membership into the Order of the Sword and Shield. Understanding that in doing so, I assume the responsibility of continuing to maintain its values of ethics, of excellence, of knowledge, and of peace. I pledge to promote these core values and to use my education for the benefit of my community, my nation, and the world in which we live. Let us all congratulate the newest members of the Order of the Sword and Shield National Honor Society. On behalf of this institution and the Order of the Sword and Shield, I wish to express our pride in your achievement and our congratulations to you. May you find in the years ahead the rewards of the educated person, imagination, adventure, humor, compassion, and understanding. May you have tolerance in your dealings with all persons, generosity in giving to those in need, and insight into the feelings of others. In relating your education to the world in which you live, you can make a meaningful contribution to your society. Thank you all.
This year we're going to do something a little bit different, as I alluded to earlier in my presentation. Every May, the larger graduation, we announce a lot of different awards to graduating seniors. And talking in our faculty meeting, we talked about the need to really do a better job for our program to recognize some of our high-achieving graduates for this December graduation, which happens not this Friday, but next, by the way. I'm sure some of our students are counting the days. So tonight, I want to recognize 7 individuals who have gone above and beyond for this their 4 years here. So I'm going to ask, again, the Dean, Dr. Vic Kapler, and Dr. Chad Foster, one of our professors, to come out and join me and to provide some of these awards to some of our students. So there's 7 individuals. As you'll see at Eastern, and it's very customary at most American universities, we have 7 different honors when you graduate with regards to grade point average. The top is summa cum laude. Those are students who graduate with a 3.9 to a 4.0. And that's a sizable feat. When you think about it, I mean, a lot of people graduate with those when they're grad students and doctoral students, but this is 120 credit hours or above for some of these students to do a 3.9 to 4.0. To do any of these honors, it's a big deal. Next, magna cum laude is 3.7 to 3.89, and then cum laude is 3.5 to 3.69. So all of these are exceptional honors, and we're very proud of all of our graduating seniors, but we want to recognize these 7. Now, 2 of them are not going to be here tonight because they're members of our online campus. EKU, and specifically Homeland Security and a couple other programs, a few other programs actually in the College of Justice and Safety, have a 100% completely online degree program that a student can get our bachelor's through that program. So the first one is an online student who won't be here. I believe he lives in Massachusetts. His name is Bryce Ansbro. Bryce is our only student that had a 4.0, a perfect grade point average. Next, Charles Dobb, cum laude. Please join us on the stage and then stay on the stage, please. Annie Hetty, cum laude. Derek Leverins, summa cum laude. Another online student, he may be here tonight, he's from Kentucky, but is Joshua Sally, cum laude. Joshua, are you here? I didn't think so, okay. Next, Alexander Vakari, cum laude. Kenneth Chase Worthington, magna cum laude. Have one more award for this group of students. As we were saying before, in May and spring, there are outstanding student awards, there's dean's awards and things like that, but in December, there's really not anything like that. So the faculty, there's 5 full-time faculty members in Homeland Security. During one of our meetings, we talked about, let's recognize one individual. And first we said it's impossible for us to just recognize one individual. But you know, it is what it is, and we decided to come up with a series of criteria. You can do the next slide for me. What we said is we wanted a student who had academic excellence, involvement in the EKU community, and also an overall contribution to the profession of Homeland Security. There's a lot of different ways you can define that, but someone who exemplified all 3 of these pieces. So we did a secret ballot, each of the 5 faculty members, and I'd like to recognize this year's 2017 Outstanding Senior Award, Mr. Charlie Dobb. Let's give all these students one more hand, please. At this point in time, we're going to take about a 2-minute intermission. We're going to get the judges back in here, and then we're going to give these scholarships and these last plaques away. 2 minutes, don't go anywhere, and we'll be right back with you. Let us get the judges wrangled up and get them back in their seats. Ladies and gentlemen, again, help me thank the judges one last time for the effort that they put forth tonight. This is a very exciting time. It's a very exciting time for the faculty members and for the students. As I said before, we've done things a little bit differently at the posters. So here's how this is going to work. We have 3 categories this evening. And that's how they were divided and actually judged this year by practitioners from that area. So the Intel judges, the Intel poster, you get the drift, right? So 3 categories: General Homeland Security, Disaster Management, and Intelligence Studies. So the winner, all 3 of those will come up. They'll stand up here, and then I'll give you the overall winner, who will be the individual who will get the $400 scholarship and the plaque. The winner of the General Homeland Security category is Mr. Jaron Thomas. Come close to me. Next, the Disaster Management category, Trenton Hurlburt. And finally, the Intelligence Studies category, Shelby Hall. This way, yeah. Or just jump on the stage, just whatever works for you. Now the difficult part. There was a lot of ties, there's a lot of numbers written on this sheet, there was a lot of back and forth, but there can only be one winner at the end of the night. The winner of the 2017 4th Annual Homeland Security Undergraduate Research Showcase Juried Research Poster Session is Mr. Jaron Thomas. We have one award remaining this evening. This would be the winner of the juried oral research presentation. We had 5 very good presentations this evening, and all 5 should be very proud of themselves. However, at the end of the night, there can only be one. The winner of the 2017 4th Annual Homeland Security Undergraduate Research Showcase Juried Oral Research Presentation winner, and the winner of a $600 scholarship from Eastern Kentucky University is Ms. Kimberly Matola. Per the contract I signed with Kimberly Matola, her face will now be replacing Miss Kayla Matola's pictures on all Research Showcase posters for Eastern Kentucky University Homeland Security. Ladies and gentlemen, a quick reminder before I conclude this evening's showcase. Students, you should have received a survey from the EKU Office of Undergraduate Research. It's very important that you complete this and return this. Dr. Gore will be sitting up front here. Raise your hand, Dr. Gore. Please bring that survey to him at the conclusion of this evening from that. I had all these fancy slides and I didn't use one of them. All right. In the end, it takes many hands to make for light work, and that's what you see before you here this evening. Without all these people listed in front of you, this would not have happened. Without the financial support and the other support from the College of Justice and Safety, we wouldn't have the hors d'oeuvres, we wouldn't have the refreshments, the awards, all those types of things that are in front of you. Miss Pauline Lively, for those of you who know her for students, you need to stop by and say thank you to her. She makes this thing effortless for me, makes us look really good. She makes that happen every year. To my fellow colleagues and Homeland Security faculty, it took many, many meetings to get to this point. Each year, you see, we add something and we improve on something. And we joke a lot of times, here in about 10 years, we're gonna have this down pat going forward. Colby Foley and the IT staff, the guy behind the camera there, taking the pictures. The HALT, our leadership, our student leadership, our Honor Society, and our Bluegrass Intelligence Community of Academic Excellence. This is a co-sponsored event with them as well. Folks, I hope that you're reinvigorated for finals, our students, from this event, that it makes you want to participate in this event next year. We do appreciate each and every one of our students. We thank everyone for being here tonight, and we wish you a safe drive home. Those of you who won awards, we'll take pictures after up here on the stage. Thank you all and good night.